Thank you everyone for joining our session. We're going to be talking today about bringing your best self to work during these uncertain times. I'm Katie Colson. I'm a Vice President Account Manager at Skanska USA Building based in Portland, Oregon. I've worked for Skanska for over 21 years, specializing in high-tech and industrial type construction. I lead a team of over 150 people. I'm originally from Minnesota and went to school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I got my degree in civil engineering. I'm married and have a 16-year-old daughter. Vince, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, again, welcome to everybody. My name is Vince Nixon. I'm the Occupational Health and Safety Program Manager here at Procore. And previously, I had the opportunity to work for 25 years in the Los Angeles Fire Department. And there I had the incredible privilege to lead just a wonderful group of very talented first responders. And here at Procore, I actually have the opportunity to imagine and to implement our company's protocols related to health, safety, and security. And I do that with a team of volunteers, about 200 different Procorians. So today, as Katie mentioned, she and I are super excited to explain to you what our perspectives are relative to employee engagement, and also to show you, I think, some tips on how really good leadership can set us all up to win. Katie?
Thanks. So this is our agenda of just talking, really kind of understanding these uncertain times, how we navigate through 2020 and most likely beyond, how both Skanska and Procore are supporting our employees, and hopefully you can get some ideas from that, and then just really having an overall discussion about trust. We are available to answer questions, or if you have any comments, so please enter those in the chat, and then we will answer at the end of the session. So first, as we jump in and really talk about just this vast uncertainty and challenges of just supporting employees and how to keep them engaged during this really unprecedented time. And that this time, it just seems like more and more stress is added to people. So when I think about work, and obviously in construction, we need to have people at the job site. Not everyone can work remotely. And so while there's people there, there's probably also people that are 100% remote. And then there's people who are probably hybrid of somewhere in between of being at the job site and not at the job site. And so how do we really keep that connection to the workers? We're both the trade workers, but also our overall teams, so that they all feel connected to the work. And I'm sure some of you have experienced where some of the projects have been completely shut down and then maybe started up and then shut down again. And so how do we react to those things? Also thinking about safety at work, and it's not just what we typically think about of how are workers performing the tasks and being safe, but it's also they're very distracted, and thinking about that mental safety and making sure that we have the right number of staff on site to help support all of those workers. And I'm sure some of people saw that where maybe people were working on site, but then not having as much office staff on site to support. I also think about our home and just our families, and maybe you had loved ones that were in nursing homes or in hospitals and couldn't go to see them. Having working parents and just all of the different school models, maybe in the spring that your kids were remote, and then starting up in the fall, and maybe someone had where kids are back to school, and then maybe school ended up going 100% remote, or maybe it's some hybrid in between. Maybe your daycare is closed. And so how do you really support people and yourself at work? Also, I think about masks and physical distancing and how that really can affect people's mental health, and really supporting our people and feeling isolated. I also think about just leisure time activities of what did we do to get away and relieve some of that stress that now we can't do. And then also in our society, there's a lot of social unrest with protesting and a lot of things that have been going on in our country for a long time that have really been brought to the surface. And people are reacting in different ways and feeling different stressors for them. There's a really volatile political climate where people have taken sides and people aren't communicating. And then I think about just unemployment, especially with small businesses or people being laid off, and what does that mean for going forward? And maybe that's your spouse or friends or family, and then thinking about just the overall economy. It can add just so many stresses to people. And so how do we really be flexible and keep reassessing during this time? I'm going to send it over to Vince to talk about how we're navigating 2020.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. It's so important to note, right, that these are unprecedented times that none of us have ever experienced to this scale, and hopefully none of us ever will again, right? A story comes to mind that I think helps to illustrate the uncertainty of our time right now. My wife and I live here in Santa Barbara, and the other day we actually went on a little beach walk. And while we were on our walk, we came to this section of the coastline that was full of rocks. And we had the choice in that moment to either turn back, right, or to continue over the rocks. And we were up for the adventure, so we decided to do just that. We made it in about 200 yards or so. And at that point, the tide was rising. The rocks were becoming more slippery, and our footing was super unstable, and there were very few options on where to go. And at that moment, I looked back and I thought, man, is it worth going back? And it really wasn't. And so that's when it really hit me that what we were experiencing in that moment on those rocks is very similar to what we're experiencing here in 2020. I think you're going to see what I mean. So first of all, we found that we needed to embrace our new reality of uncertainty. We were there on the rocks, that wasn't going to change, and we needed to make some decisions. So we had to cautiously measure our steps. It was no longer safe just to walk. We had to really be cautious in the way that we moved forward. We had to maintain balance on that unstable footing. We also had to slow our cadence down significantly, which meant that we were not going to be able to achieve probably the lofty goals that we had initially intended. And we had to really play defense, especially at the start. Another thing we had to do was redefine what it meant to win. We just at this point wanted to make it out without some major injury. But eventually we found a rhythm, and we were able to actually pick up our pace a little bit. And during that time, we had to remain highly flexible as well. It was important that we planned and executed and adjusted with courage, because in order for us to win, we had to keep moving forward. And so we found that there were times when we failed fast, and I almost lost my Patagonia hat. But we found as well that especially as the tide was rising, we needed to recover even faster. We were able to do that. We had to problem solve in motion. We had to take advantage of opportunities. Like there was a time when a little piece of sand presented itself and we dashed across it really quick. So there's opportunities in life and business when that we can take advantage of even now. So we had to build best practices as we were figuring it out. And the final thing I wanted to say is that we had to keep perspective and celebrate the small wins. We had to stick together. We had to trust each other. She was way more adept at covering those rocks than I was. So she looked at me and in a moment of encouragement just said, Vince, we've come this far, we got this. And so I think the connection for all of us, though, is that for us in the construction industry, we've had to do these very same things in order to survive and then in order to thrive. We had to embrace our new normal of uncertainty. We had to redefine what it meant to win. We had to plan, execute, and adjust with courage. And we had to keep our perspective, celebrate the small wins, and stay optimistic. And so the real key with being able to support our employees during these times is not only for us to embrace these realities of where we're working from the rocks, but to be able to support them well. Now, Katie's going to share with us what Skanska is doing to support their employees during these times of uncertainty. Katie?
Thanks, Vince. So, when I think about, just what we're doing, and hopefully these are some things that, your companies or can do as well to support people, or just other things that you can think about. As we adjust to, helping our employees, obviously we have different time off, but we added in just a COVID leave of absence. So if people needed additional help, especially, when I think about working parents, or people that are trying to support their families in different ways, to have that option. Actually, it's interesting as last year at Groundbreak, I spoke about flexible work and how we do that in the construction industry. And obviously this year, a lot of people had to just jump right in, whether you had a plan or not. And so thinking about how do we really work on flexible work, and what is this going to look like in the future, of some things that we thought maybe wouldn't work in construction that we are making work. And so kind of readjusting that. We also did some stuff for home setup. Obviously, it's easy to work at your kitchen table for a week, but not for months and months. And so we offered just some sit-stand desks and earbuds, whether people needed chairs, just to make sure that they were in a good position to be working from home. I think about mental health, and especially around construction, where mental health is such an important topic, and suicide rates are high in construction. And we've offered just 24/7 access to counseling and having lots of sessions to talk about suicide prevention and making sure that's the forefront of people's minds. We've offered additional childcare, whether it's backup childcare. We also have an app to help with online group enrichment classes, one-on-one virtual learning, one-on-one sessions with certified teachers, some tutoring, just to help provide additional resources, especially to working parents. And then thinking about how do we communicate and help employees. You know, we don't have that opportunity to have those quick chats in the hall anymore. And so an interesting story is I had making calls to some of my employees, and a person who's actually pretty introverted, and when I see them on the job site, it's just kind of a quick hello. And I had called them, and it ended up being a 30-minute conversation talking about, you know, how they were doing. And so thinking about, you know, are people feeling isolated, and how do we make sure that we're reaching out and having that communication? We've done a lot of education to help people. We've done webinars on mental health and how do you lead through change and embracing life's challenges, and leading virtually, but also doing lessons learned for COVID that we can apply to multiple job sites, and that we'll use into the future after COVID is over. Thinking about also, we've done some book clubs around inclusion and diversity. We've talked about white fragility, and so you want to talk about race, and really bringing issues to the forefront where people can talk about that, especially when a lot of those things are on people's minds. We did an African American history class where we actually are watching a class that is presented at Yale, and then having conversations about that, that's talking about from emancipation to the present, to really help people have empathy and understand others. We're doing a training about know the line of how your words and actions matter, and making sure that you're being courageous and speaking up if you see something that isn't right, and how do we make sure that everyone really feels part of the team. And as we go through this, it's so important to be flexible and constantly do that plan, do, check, act of what worked last week or last month might not work right now and into the future. So Vince is going to talk about how Procore is supporting their workers.
Great, thank you, Katie. It's actually incredible how Skanska has just stepped into that gap and, you know, provided that support. It's really impressive. At Procore, we have been working from home from March, and we have really gotten settled into our new digs, our work from home environment. And this is mostly because of the steps that have been taken from the beginning to drive culture down really deep into the DNA of our company, and also just the amount of presence and fortitude that the leaders have shown. And so what I want to do is share with you a story about how leadership, I think, really drove trust. And it's a story where I actually happen to do some things well. So I want to just call that out from the start. That feels a little weird, but I think it's really important. And where I want to start is talking about the place of caring for our employees and making them feel like they are heard and seen and valued and have a place of belonging. I really believe this with all my heart, that people will not care what you think or believe until they believe and think that you care. And so the story starts out with this. I was promoted to captain with the LA Fire Department, and I was transferred to a station that was one of the busiest stations in the nation, nicknamed the House of Pain. And here at the House of Pain, I was the new guy. I was coming into the situation to an established crew. They had already, were good at what they did, and they were wondering, hey, can we trust this new captain to lead us well? And so I set out from the beginning to do three things and to do three things well. I really wanted to, first of all, engage my crew as individuals. I wanted to understand what their felt needs were, understand what motivated them as individuals, and then kind of shuffle that into the team, so to speak. As well, I really wanted to equip them. They were younger firefighters, they needed a lot of training, and I also wanted to impart to them the bigger picture, the vision that I was hoping to roll out there at Fire Station 46. The final thing that I wanted to do was to really empower them. I knew that no matter how great they were at their jobs, if they were going to be truly engaged and motivated to be and do their best, then they needed to feel like that team was a community that they could rely on and trust in, that they were seen and heard, and they knew what their place was and their role was. Well, the trust that I worked so hard to foster was put to the test one night. Shots rang out, gunfire around the fire station on the outside. And by the time we were able to open up the doors of the fire station, there was an individual from the community that was dragging another person who had just been shot. And they laid him down on the sidewalk in front of the fire station. And my crew, they bounced into action and went to work saving his life. My role was to make sure that they were safe as they carried out their duties. And so I grabbed the witness and I said to him, hey, where's the shooter? What's he wearing? And he looked at me and he said, you know what? He's wearing a black hoodie, and there he is right there. And he identified a man who was about 25 feet away. And this man was walking at a quick pace right toward our incident, mild heart attack. And then I looked over at my crew, and several of them had already stood up and they were ready to bail. And we all knew that if we left that scene in that moment, that the victim was done for. And so I said one word to them. I said, wait. And at that moment, they went back to work. So then I looked over at the person who at the potential shooter, and he was like 15 feet away from our scene at this point. And so I said, stop where you are, turn around and go the other way. And I positioned myself between him and my crew, and he kept coming. And so I said it again, and thankfully at that moment, he turned around and went the other direction. So we all drew a big sigh of relief and went back to work in saving this individual's life. And something that I want to really push or just impress upon you is the reality that trust is literally what saved that man's life that night. My crew trusted me, I trusted them, and as a result, that man's life was saved. And you may be thinking, okay, that's a pretty gnarly story, right? We're not going to actually face that kind of a thing. But the reality of the matter is that the data shows, and this is for all of us, the data shows that empathic leadership that really presses in actually creates an environment of trust. And that trust enables our employees to be able to show up and be and do their very best. And that's how we all win. And maybe you don't know this, but 70% of employees that were polled in the United States were asked if they felt engaged at work. 70% of them said no. They felt like they were disengaged. And when they were asked why they felt that way, they said, because I don't feel heard, I don't feel seen, I don't feel cared for, I don't feel like I have a place of belonging, and I don't feel like work is a place of community for me. And so the reality of the matter is that we as leaders can make a huge impact on our people when we just step in and show that kind of empathic leadership and enable them to be able to show up and be and do their best. Here at Procore as well, we'll transition to talk about what we're doing at Procore. And many of the things that Katie just mentioned, we are doing some of those exact same things. A front burner initiative for me in particular during this time has been office ergonomics. And what we found is that we have employees who are highly engaged, right? We, like you, try to attract and to retain the best talent. But the reality of the matter is if they're in pain, if they're feeling fatigue from their workstation or discomfort, it impacts the way that they come to work. So what we did is reached out to the company, to everyone in the company, and we provided the opportunity for them to meet up and to have an ergonomic assessment, to check out their workstation, and to make sure that if they had any needs, that we would be able to meet those. And I'll tell you what, just something like that made such a difference. And I would encourage you to check in with your staff, because I guarantee that there are people who come to work unnecessarily, affected by pain or fatigue or discomfort due to their workstation, and something so simple as providing them maybe an ergonomic accessory of some sort can actually change the game for them. So for the remainder of our time together today, Katie and I really want to dive in a little bit deeper into this idea of trust fueling engagement. So Katie's going to start that off.
Thanks, Vince. Yeah, so, when I really think about trust, I think about really that sense of belonging. And when I think about belonging, it's, we talk about an inclusive environment, but I think of belonging as really kind of the next step, where people really feel that they are part of the team. And when you ask people, why do you like working there? Why do you like working for our company? They can't really put their finger on it, but they just do. And that's that advanced kind of culture. And I think about just a really simplistic example. We were doing a training and we probably had about 50 people. And I looked out into the audience and there was all of these tables. And normally, I'd see all the superintendents at one table and maybe all the accountants at another table and maybe all the women at another table. But when I looked out over this training, is that everybody was just mixed and talking, and there was old and younger people, and there was superintendents and project managers and accountants and admins, and everyone all working together and sitting there chatting. And I thought, what a great environment of having people that they feel so comfortable just being around each other and really having that sense of belonging. And so when you have that, it obviously adds just having such a trusting team, so that when things do get more intense, you do have issues, that you can really feel that sense of belonging and being part of the team to get through those hard times.
Another thing that we want to talk about is how being busy and being engaged are actually two very different things, and that how the level of trust that we have with our leaders and with our teams actually help us to move more toward being engaged and hopefully less busy. At least that's been my story during this work from home period. I'm kind of wired, as you might imagine, being at that fire station and running those 20 plus calls a day. I'm wired to knocking out things and feeling busy and being busy. And it's easy for me personally, and you may result or resonate with this, to be able to like whack moles all day long. A mole pops up, you knock it down. Remember that game? Or put out fires or check boxes, whatever metaphor works for you. But the reality is, at the end of the day, I find sometimes when that's been my day, I'm just busy, and I don't feel particularly engaged, that at the end of the day, I wonder how productive I've really been. I've gotten a lot done, but I really am learning to understand that engagement is more about being able to use our creativity, to be curious in our problem solving, and to be courageous in being able to roll things out in an environment where we feel safe. And I think that that's what I'm trying to move toward myself. And in doing so, I'm finding that, honestly, I'm a lot happier when I'm doing that. And so if we can encourage that of our employees, to take time to actually question them and speak to them and relate to them in a way that's going to help drive that engagement. So another thing that I wanted to talk about today was universal empathy. Katie, I know you want to weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, I think for me, my situation can be different, and that's where, I think as we look at, we're all in the same storm, but in different boats, right? Of how what are some different things that affect us, where, I am initially, I'd worked remotely. Now I work pretty much at our office or at the job site. My daughter's 16 and doing online learning at home. My husband also works from home. And so for all of us being at home, it was definitely a difficult time, and I can be more effective if I'm at the job site or at work. But then also, trying to make sure that, my daughter, sports are shut down right now. And so making sure that what is she keeping her time and what is she doing? My dad actually had just finished chemo and he's still living in Minnesota where I'm from. My mom actually passed away at the beginning of COVID. And so not being able to go back and help my family, that's been difficult. And then also for just myself, I love to travel and go see new places. And that really is a stress relief and a break for me. And not being able to do some of those things that I really like to do can be difficult to be able to sort of manage through this. And so that's where I think of, kind of keep assessing and having that empathy of knowing that everyone is at a different spot. So some session takeaways that really we'd like you to, think about is really having that empathy of learning about others and, just understanding what people are going through. So educating yourself about, whether it's different races, whether it's different people, of what people are going through as far as school and how do they keep going with their kids and being working parents. How do you help people who are working remote if they're feeling lonely or disconnected, but also the people that are on the job site where they feel like every day they're potentially in harm's way, and how do they feel safe at the job? Really having that deep trust and working with employees so that they really feel valued. Know that we will actually make mistakes, and that's what, it can be difficult. I know initially we had sent people home. We had superintendents and the safety people still working on site. And when we said, hey, we've got to figure out a different way to work. We need to bring some more of the project managers, project engineers back to site. And, I think, we didn't do the best job of really telling them why was it important, because maybe they were thinking, geez, actually, I'm more efficient working at home. But as an individual, maybe you were, but our overall team wasn't. And so how some things that the office staff would normally be doing, now the superintendent is managing or the safety person is managing. And so how do we really have the why, and then look at, okay, we made a mistake. How do we then correct it? How do we communicate better with people? And then just keeping positive and seizing those opportunities. When things are challenging, that's when we learn so much. If things are always so easy, even though these times can be really difficult, this is where we actually learn a lot and how we can be better moving forward. So I'm going to transition over to Vince to close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Katie. So in closing, I want to circle back to my story about navigating 2020 from the rocks. When my wife and I were in the midst of it, we in that moment obviously had no idea how far ahead of us the rocks were going to extend. We couldn't see around the corner of the coast, and it just seemed like this was going to go on forever. And I know that today we have no real idea of where we're at in this journey together, of the uncertainty of our times. Hopefully somewhere toward the middle. I mean, who can say? But we're learning how to operate effectively from the rocks. And that's super important. And it's important that we identify that reality. My wife and I finally rounded the rocks in the last quarter, and the open sand was there in front of us. This incredible sense of accomplishment and relief came over us. And we realized in that moment that, wow, we made it. And she actually looked up at me and she said, Vince, she goes, now that was quite a journey. And we may not have that, the ability to even imagine that type of perspective now. But as Katie said, I really believe as well that these times, these uncertain times, are going to give way to a new normal. And maybe the new normal will be defined as us showing up for each other, even as humans, just to be and do better. And maybe in the end, that's the big takeaway. Thank you so much for jumping in with us. Katie and I are thrilled that you spent this time with us. Take care.